Hi, I'm Harvey Hubble. You're watching Seedling.tv, nourishing mind, body, and planet. Subscribe now. It's good for you.
So thank you so much to everyone, the Baker Creek group, but all the volunteers who actually put together this amazing labor of love. And a remembrance that the world is only living as long as there's diversity. Whether it be the natural world or our social world, and we know both are under all kinds of interesting threats. Bija, which is what the expo is dedicated to, the bija, the seed, the Sanskrit of it, and in my language, Hindi, it actually explains what seed is. Bija means life. So first thing, seed is about life. And seed is living. Real seed is living. Bija is that from which life arises on its own forever and ever and ever. First thing, on its own. Doesn't need a GMO, doesn't need a Bt toxin, doesn't need Roundup resistance. On its own. That's self-organization. There's a scientific name for it now. Brilliant name. Autopoiesis. Poetry is creation. Poiesis is creation. Autopoiesis is that which creates itself, self-organized creativity. Every free seed is self-organized. Every free human being is self-organized. Gandhi had a wonderful word for it. Swaraj. Raj is governance. Swaraj is to rule yourself. Forever and ever. Again and again and again. The prayer we say when we sow a seed in India is, let this seed be exhaustless. Let it give life forever, for generations to come. In every seed is the memory of millennia, of the soil where it grew and the different soils, the memory of the loving hands, the brilliance, the knowledge, the creativity, the intelligence of the seed itself, because you can only be self-organized when you have intelligence. And intelligence cannot be artificial, because self-organization means it doesn't reside somewhere else. But it's precisely this permanence, the fact that seed multiplies. Every seed can give rise to 10 or 20, 100, and the family of millets are called millets, and they're my favorite crops. We call them the forgotten foods, and I always say with my colleagues in Navdanya, the movement for seed saving I started 30 years ago. And that's another reason it's good to be back at the expo, because it's like a combination of celebration of all of us who have been doing this work over decades, but to the seed that has been working over millennia. Now, each little seed of the millets, and they're tiny seeds, the millet family has its roots in the word million. In the Latin, million is thousands. One seed, thousands of seeds. How can you ever have scarcity when one can become 1,000? So to create scarcity, you have to turn one into a zero. And all the efforts in industry cannot be more brilliant than the seed itself is. It cannot do more breeding than the farmers are doing all the time. Our farmers took one wild grass called Oryza sativa in India, turned it into 200,000 varieties. The aromatic rice, the basmati that grows in my valley, the black rice, the purple rice, the red rice, the rice for lactating mothers, the rice for babies, the rice that can tolerate floods and salt, which we've saved in our seed banks in Orissa and distributed those seeds after the cyclones, after the hurricanes, after the tsunami. Truckloads of seed. Every attempt of industry has been to rob seed of its power to multiply, its power to renew, its power to be diverse. Because anything that evolves into diversity. Everything that is controlled externally is based on uniformity. So diversity, in fact, in nature and society, is a reflection of the freedom of the different beings in that ecosystem. And uniformity is a reflection of external control. And that external control merges very, very quickly into such fear that anything that is free and alive on its own terms becomes a threat. And I see so much of what we see wrong in our times as responses of people who are afraid of a nature that is independent, of a seed that self-organizes, of seed that multiplies, of farmers that have seeds in their hands, of people who have intelligence and can make their decisions. So every step of violence we witness, whether it be violence against the seed or it be violence in society, and each of us in our societies can tell stories by the day. They just killed a brilliant journalist in India because she was an independent writer. That was her crime. She was free. So I see today's fear as a fear of diversity, a fear of life, and a fear of self-organization. And that fear then comes expressed in wiping out diversity, which is why, again, salutations to the Heirloom Expo for having all of these exhibitions to help us remember. The fear of life is to constantly try and exterminate life. Which is why when we say, let the seed be exhaustless, what Monsanto does, and Delta and Pineland, which it bought out, what they do is create a terminator technology to make seeds sterile. I started seed saving 30 years ago because that's where the old chemical industry, when that industry said, we are not making enough money, and we've got to take ownership of the seed in order to generate the profit. So they were seeking in '87 royalties from every seed that a farmer buys anywhere. And the royalties for them were defined through genetic engineering. I always remind people, GMOs did not come to us because someone thought they were feeding the world. Just like in the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution was not because of feeding. They just wanted to introduce chemicals into farming. That time they gave the spin of the Green Revolution, and now it's the spin of GMOs feed the world. And both have created hunger. They haven't solved the problem of nutrition. They've created hunger because they've created scarcity. They've created scarcity because, those pumpkins, those squashes, were all seed. And inside them is seed for the next generation. But along the way, we also get food. So can you see the generosity of seed? That seed goes to seed, which is the cycle of permanence, but also is so creative, it says, and I will not just renew myself for my next generation, I'm going to give you food along the way. Food for me is a byproduct of the seed. And we forget that. We very often forget that, which is why so much fake food is overtaking our lives, because we forget that real food begins in seed and must go back to seed. The first big threat, the threat to diversity, is expressed in the fact that not only have we taken the diversity in each species, here in the squashes or the rices, or in the wild plant called teosinte, which gave rise to the thousands of corn varieties. If Mexico even today does not allow GMO corn, it's because the people come out and say, we are corn. We are the culture of corn. We cannot be separated from our corn. And that is the reason, even today, the culture of corn blesses Mexico. There have been attempts by Monsanto again and again. Last time it was trying to take over 6 million acres. And they got a presidential decree. And then the people got it stopped, both through building movements as well as through legal actions, which also reminds me of the fact that, we ourselves, as citizens seeking freedom, reduce ourselves to monocultures. We think, oh, I'll just be an anti-GM activist. I'll just be a pesticide activist. I'll just be a good food activist. No. All of this is one piece, because the Earth is interconnected in a web of life. And in an interconnected world, we can't divide things up and say, I'll only look at this. Because the divisions cripple us. And seeing the connections is what gives us power. Seeing the connections amongst each other, which is nothing but solidarity, and seeing the connections between us and nature, and seeing the connections in nature. So we've eaten 12,000 species of plants. Now we're trading in 12, and what's spreading is 4 that are genetically modified: corn, canola, soya, cotton. Not only have we shrunk the base of our seed diversity and our plant diversity, with it we've shrunk the base of our diets. And what's being grown now is not even being grown for food. 90% corn and soya is going for biofuel and animal feed. It's not a food system. It's make money at any cost system. I call it the money machine. It's a war against renewal. I mentioned the Terminator technology, but hybrids too were designed to not breed true. So farmers would have to come to the market every year. And even the issue of patenting of seed is a war against the renewal of the seed. Because a patent is an exclusive right granted to a patent holder to prevent anyone else from making, using, selling, distributing. But when a Monsanto takes a patent on seed, and that's all they're seeking, that's all they're seeking. And I actually feel so grateful that we were able in India to stop them from having patents on seed. There is no law in this country on these issues, they just get patents. In India, we have a law, Article 3J of our patent law, which does not allow Monsanto to have patents. Because if they have a patent, there are 3 crimes against the earth and farmers and people. The first crime is they take this diversity and richness and reduce it to monocultures because they don't have the brilliance to deal with diversity. Diversity needs brilliance. Monocultures needs dumbness. Second, it's an attack on the farmer's right to save seeds and exchange seeds, which is the basis of seed freedom. But it's an attack on the freedom of the seed itself. Because the seed needs the loving care of a grower, a gardener, a farmer to go to the next generation. And that is why in seed there's a joint creativity. I call it the co-creativity between humans and the plants. You can't have seed. I mean, you can have forest seeds and you can have, but crop seeds need cultivation to get to their next generation and to multiply and to flourish. So it is a war against abundance, because there's a fear of abundance in the hands of people. Everything in the so-called economy is how do you make people dependent on buying what they need, not having what they need, not growing what they need. The growing issue is precisely where now it's starting to get recognized, and we've had to learn this in Navdanya through our work on saving seeds. A lot of people will come to Navdanya because, A, the seeds give us food that's tasty. The industrial crops are tasteless, nutritionally empty, loaded with toxics. So they don't have the positive values of what food should be, but they have all the negative values of food, what food should not be. The malnutrition that's being created begins in the seed and the way we grow it. The organic farming increases nutrition because it increases the nutrition to the soil. Organic farming, for me, is nothing more than feeding the soil and feeding the soil organisms. And seeds are not just the result of our labor. You know, the earthworm and the mycorrhizae have done their bit. The pollinator has contributed 1/3 of all the food we have. You add all that, every seed holds those creativities and contributions. All of the past evolution, all of the future. I have a lot of debates with the corporations, and they always say, oh, yeah, we recognize farmers have done their bit. And I say, no, we are not talking about the past only. We are talking about the future. And it's only seeds in the hands of people, in the hands of caring farmers and gardeners, which will be the future. The other is annihilating the future. It's annihilating the future because 75% of this planet's destruction is because of seeds that came from greed for greed, not for nourishing life and allowing life to continue in abundance. The abundance includes the nutrition in the food. In organic food, there's 106% more copper, 61% more magnesium, 64% more zinc, 120% more chromium, and 72% of all trace elements. And when I started saving seeds, all I wanted to do was save seeds. We didn't realize then it would give us more food. Our work is showing, and we have a report, and this should be available on the Navdanya website. We said we are not going to measure yield. I mean, what's the point of measuring yield of nutritionally empty stuff? You should measure nutrition. So we measure nutrition per acre. And heirloom seeds have more nutrition. But they're called inferior, they're called primitive. They're called backward. And there's only this description that has wiped them out, not because they did not give us nourishment. So this report we did, we calculated nutrition per acre. Farmers who have their own seeds, who grow diversity, have so much more production of nutrition, which matters, that we could feed 2 Indias if we just saved seeds and grew them out ecologically for the crop. Having reduced the nutrition, I'll just give you, we did a study of 200 of our seed savers who are organic farmers. And I'll just give you 2 nutrients, and this was an average calculated. So carotene is the vitamin A precursor. And average carotene on our biodiverse farms with native seeds is 3,000 milligrams per acre. And in a chemical monoculture with the so-called high-yielding varieties, it's 450. Can you imagine? Yeah? So instead of just saving seeds, growing crops, doing organic farming, which would increase your availability of carotene, what are they offering for 20 pathetic years? I talked about dumbness, and I talked about stupidity. It has to be stupidity to try and make rice produce carotene, which they call golden rice. They call it golden rice. It has 80 patents. It's not yet reached performance level. Agronomically, it's not doing well enough. But even if they were to be successful, other crops can give us 350% more, just like that. Iron. With our native seeds and organic farming, there's 29 grams of iron per acre compared to the chemical monocultures, which is 11. So more than twice. Rather than just solve the problem of iron by growing diversity, what do they want to do? They try to introduce genetically engineered banana. Now, banana is very good in potassium. We call it the culprit, the all-giving food. But it's not the richest source of iron, so we're going to increase iron. They said we'll increase it 5-fold. It has 0.22 micrograms. They'd increase it to 2. Our turmeric, I know you're going crazy over turmeric these days, you know? Well, my ancestors knew long ago how good it is. Turmeric, 7,000% more than a GMO banana would ever give you. So by forgetting diversity, we are forgetting the options we have. And with it is an extrapolation of the idea that led to colonialism, the idea that if a land is not externally controlled by a colonizer, it is empty. You know, it was terra nullius. Our lands were called empty. Australia was called empty because we were defined as not fully human. Because we weren't white, we weren't Christians, and we weren't violent. We were just primitive. Yeah. To be human as part of the earth, to care for other beings, including other human beings, that's primitiveness. So as you celebrate the primitive seed, let's celebrate the primitive human being. So what's happening to the seed, besides the fact we had a fraud green revolution which destroyed my land, Punjab. I wrote a book called The Violence of the Green Revolution on that. Bill Gates is trying to take it to Africa, called the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa. We've had 20 years of a failed genetically engineered miracle. They were supposed to control pests with the BT crops and weeds with the Roundup Ready crops. What do we have? With BT crops, we have super-resistant bollworm, and we have new pests we've never had in cotton. The white fly, the aphids, the jasses, the army bug, the mealy bug. You know, we've got a diversity of bugs, not a diversity of cotton anymore. And in terms of Roundup resistance, half the farmlands of this country are overtaken by superweeds. So there are 2 new disasters to rescue this failed technology. The first disaster is they added the dicamba resistance, and you know everywhere what the dicamba drift is doing. But for me, the even more serious threat is people like Bill Gates and others have forgotten that life that is self-organized in complexity. And that self-organized complexity is in every seed. And it's in us. So having ignored diversity, having ignored the damage of chemicals, we now have disease epidemics. And the disease epidemics are related to the fact that we as human beings are only 10% human cells. We are 90% bacteria and microorganisms in our gut, which is now being called the microbiome. Diversity is not a luxury. You can't take the same GM soya and modulate it into 30 things, because we might be stupid enough to not recognize that it's the same thing. The sensors in our gut know the difference. And because the sensors in our gut know the difference, and they need diversity, the lack of diversity is becoming a major source of disease. And then the toxics are another major source of disease. But of course, the tragedy is that the same industry, right now we are being governed by a cartel of three. Cartel of three. Sadly, they're the ones who bring us poisons, they're the ones who bring us GMOs, they're the ones who destroy our seed diversity, and when people get cancer, they're the ones who own the patented cancer drugs. So for them, it's a wonderful market. You know, the more people fall sick, the more their profits. For us, the measure is well-being. The well-being of the earth, the well-being of every species, and the well-being of our children. That well-being is also based on the right of every species to exist. When His Holiness' 60th birthday was taking place, I think that's 20 years ago, I was asked to speak on his birthday celebration in a big hall, and I talked about patenting, and I talked about GMOs. And he scribbled a note to me in Tibetan, which said, every being has a right to happiness. No being has a right to take away anyone's happiness. And he was talking about beings in terms of the beings that sit here. And the fact that these plants don't walk, or at this point they're not growing, doesn't mean they are inert and dead. They're holding their future growth as potential. You know, my PhD is on quantum theory, on non-separability and potential. That's all the world is, that we are related. That's non-separability. And that we are all potential, including the potential in each seed, which seems to be latent, but is just holding its energy for the next generation and the next generation and the next generation, as long as it gets the care. The opposite of this, thinking of timelessness, of permanence, of dynamic evolution, is the fear of life. The word amaranth is derived from amar, which means forever. We eat the amaranth as a sacred food. The Mexicans, it was banned by the Spanish because it was a sacred food. It was made illegal in that time. Right now, you have Bill Gates. I have a favorite company called Monsanto, and I'm having a favorite person now called Bill Gates. He's kind of evolving into that category. And the new technologies they're trying to push, people like Gates, having failed with genetic engineering based on reductionist mechanistic thought, that seeds are a machine, life is a machine, all we have to do is engineer it. Poor Bill Gates, who patented software, thinks life is cut and paste. It's a word program. And so he's pushing all the research on this thing called CRISPR, which is called gene editing. You will edit a plant. We'll edit life. And they're going to the next step, which is basically gene drives, which are an extermination system. Now, of course, because life is not a word program, it's interrelated, there's complexity. In an early CRISPR program, they found 1,000 off-target impacts You know, you're trying to edit this little piece, and 1,000 places things are changing in the organism. But we knew, even with genetic engineering of Roundup Ready and Bt, that things were changing, which there was denial of. There was such huge denial of the basis of life, science of life, and the science of self-organizing. So Bill Gates has joined with the defense research called DARPA on gene drives, and the first thing they want to turn extinct is the Palmer amaranth. This is what their study says. We create gene drives in Palmer amaranth to reduce or eliminate the weed in agricultural fields. And then there's a little footnote saying, impact? Well, in India, they do eat it. A little food security impact. Of course, the point is it'll never work, because just like their genetic engineering of herbicide resistance, which denied the evolutionary potential of weeds, has led to superweeds, gene editing and gene drives will allow, and this is predicted, and in some research is showing, will allow evolution of resistance in the very entities you want to push to extinction. Because life, like the seed, goes on. And because life goes on, that's where our work comes in. To know where this logic of the monoculture of the mind, the militarization of the mind, this logic of extermination, where it comes from and where it's taking us, but to recognize that a cartel of 3 and 1 billionaire is a pathetic number compared to 300 million species and billions of people who want to live. Who want to live in freedom, who want to live in abundance, who want to live in interconnectedness, and that resilience and that diversity, that evolution and that well-being is in the nature of all life. We don't have to construct it. We don't have to invent it. Those who don't have it keep trying to invent. They keep trying to invent the seed. You know, I've done so many legal cases against Monsanto, and I have such a good time because judges wake up. Judges wake up realizing, yeah, the seed is not a machine. It's not a manufacture. When Monsanto puts one new gene into a plant, which is actually a pollution of that organism, and they should be punished for the contamination, they can't be rewarded with an ownership not just of that seed, but all future generations to come. That's what they're seeking. Now, for 30 years, we've done this work with all our love, all our humility, and I can tell you that we have been stronger than Monsanto has. And because anything that comes from fear and comes from insecurity will never have the level of power that anything that comes from life and love has. So I find it very interesting that every year Monsanto is having to remake itself. Yeah? 30 years ago, they said they're a life sciences industry. It didn't work. Then they said we're a technology industry. Now they're calling themselves a digital industry. Suddenly, they're doing digital farming. So, you know, you have very close to you a place called Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley thinks the world is digits. Yeah? So a young man created something called the Climate Corporation, which is make money out of climate data. Monsanto bought it up 3 years ago. Then Monsanto bought up the world's biggest soil corporation, which also just collects soil data. Now, the Climate Data Corporation under Monsanto is basically linking to insurance. If you don't get their seeds, there won't be insurance. And when I started the work on seed, they said we can make $1 trillion annually if we have royalties on seed. What they're saying now is we can make $3 trillion annually if we control big data. The data of the climate, the data of the soil, the data on the seed, the genetic data of the seed. Because they don't work on evolution. They don't work with the love that brought all this diversity here. Right now, they have a whole new system of genetic mining and letting the computers read the genome and then just take the patent. It's like playing casino with life. So at this point, they're really looking at farming without farmers, food without food, seed without seed. What little seed there is sits in their Svalbard seed bank, which flooded this year. Do you remember? It flooded. It was supposed to be the doomsday vault where seeds would survive. But it flooded. And in spite of a horrible heat, your pumpkins did all right, you know? Because diversity is resilience. And in the intelligence of life is the ability to evolve to the next step of climate change. After all, this planet has come through so many temperatures. These seeds have come through so many different rainfall zones. And the two things we must not do is panic because of climate change and panic because of the power of the cartel of three. We've got to cultivate hope. We've got to cultivate joy. And all we have to remember is the seeds of the future lie in the seeds of the past that we protect. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. You know, I picked this corn up because no heirloom corn will have this weird formation of a leaf coming out here. No heirloom corn. Heirloom corns, they wrap up here, they have a tassel. These new hybrids, microphone. Yeah. So you know the kind of distortions we are seeing, some we can't see. But this, to me, is an abuse of the corn. Why should leaves grow out from the top? Dark green leaves. Have you noticed them in your hybrid corn now? Well, they brought it to India, 75% for animal feed. But we are noticing this. We can't eat this corn. We can't roast it. We go back to our native corns to really eat. So real food is in real seed. Real freedom is in real people. Thank you. We have a little time for some questions, if anyone has. Well, the most compelling argument is it's failed. We can't put the future in a failed technology that didn't even last 20 years. These seeds have lasted, we don't know how many thousands of years. So the failure is the first. Second is all GMOs are married to toxins. They're basically poison-producing plants. Whether it is Bt toxin being expressed in the Bt crops or the glyphosate resistance in the Roundup Ready crops. Now, you're eating that. There's research done in Canada that pregnant women and the fetus had the Bt toxin surviving, even though Monsanto said it degrades. Roundup, all over, we'll have a panel right now on what Roundup is doing to our health. But there's a third strong reason, which is what I said in the beginning. GMOs were just an entry point. They're just a door to monopoly and patenting. And we cannot put the future of life on Earth and our food future in the hands of a corrupt cartel of three that only knows how to kill. They don't know anything else. They don't know how to grow anything. They don't know how to let things flourish. All they know is how to kill first human beings, now other beings. And when I mentioned exterminating the amaranth, I was pointing to that will to destroy, to kill. And what we need is the will to grow, to save, exchange, flourish. That will not come through the GMOs. That will come through freedom seeds, open-pollinated seeds, heirloom seeds. You can refer to them in many, many ways, but they are where the freedom of life is, and where the freedom of the grower is, and the freedom from the cartel is.
But you found that the younger farmers are pushing Monsanto away, and also trapped into taking Monsanto seeds around the world.
Well, like I said, life is a continuum. And I don't think we should anymore be talking only of farmers or only of those who eat food. You know, the day I eat a squash like this, I'm saving the seed too, even though I might not be growing it. So, I mean, the beautiful thing about biodiversity is by consuming it, you make it grow. Yeah? When you consume oil, there's less oil in the world. When you consume native seeds and diversity, there's more of it in the world. So nature, the farmer and the grower and the eater are one potential. And I think those who eat have a bigger role right now only because, A, they're more eaters than growers. Yeah? And I do know that young people, if given the freedom, you know, I've built a school over time. In fact, one reason it's always difficult for me to come to the Heirloom Expo is we do this 1-month course at this time on the A to Z of agroecology and organic farming. 1 month, 1 week on seed, 1 week on soil, 1 week on living food, living economies. In detail, practice as well as thought working together. All young people. I go to universities and ask, how many of you would be farmers if you could choose to be farmers? The whole hall puts up its hand. Because young people are realizing the depth of knowledge, the depth of humanity, the depth of our oneness with the earth that we derive when we farm. So young people will farm if the system does not criminalize farming. Either criminalizing seed saving or criminalizing farming by punishing the grower by not letting them have the fair price. You know, it's happening in my country. It's happening in this country. You know, which milk producer is getting a fair price of milk? 99% of what a consumer pays is going to the trading system and the processing system. 1% is going to the producer. Now, if we can make that 50%, half people would be farmers. Yeah, that's the last one. Yeah. Yeah, it was flooded because, you see, we are living in climate change. And I used to say this to Carrie Fowler, who's the big founder there. And I used to say, Carrie, because he used to say, Vandana, it's not safe enough to have seeds all over the place. I said, it's the only place they have safety. Because when it's all over the place, one place can be destroyed, but not everything will be destroyed. Yeah? And he used to say, no, this is a safe place. I said, but, you know, you're building it in an area of snow and permafrost, and that can melt with climate change. That's what happened. The permafrost melted. Now, they're not going to tell us there's been destruction, because it's supposed to be where we put all our hope and faith. And nothing that is basic to life can be left in one place in the hands of the powerful monopolizers and destroyers. It must be in the hands of everyone who cares for the future. Thank you, thank you.